Epoxy primers are excellent barrier coatings, and one of the advantages of an E-coat is the electrodisposition application creates a very good bond with very good barrier properties. So the epoxy primers, having good barrier properties, are very close to the E-coat in their ability to prevent the underlaying substrate to be attacked. The biggest reason I would say a customer would not use an epoxy primer is usually speed. Epoxy primers take a little longer to set up. They have a little longer flash time. They're reserved for specialty vehicles that are required or more of a restoration type repair. 1K epoxies are not prominent in the collision industry. Most of them are two-part, or you've got an epoxide A-part and an amine-based, polyamine-based, or ketamine-based activator. Etching's not required. It depends on the composition of the coating itself. Some epoxies are built to go direct to metal. Others do require a metal treatment process prior to the epoxy being applied. The tech data sheet will indicate what's the appropriate process for using these coatings. They're usually applied at lower film builds. They do not usually cross-link, so that would be a big difference between an epoxy and an etch primer. They're usually a lacquer-type chemistry, one component, although they have an acid additive. They perform the same function. I would say that the biggest difference between a wash primer and an etch primer in my mind is its transparency, whether it's opaque and achieves hiding, or if it's translucent and you're able to see the underlying layers. I would say that's the biggest difference between a wash primer and an etch primer. Most self-etch primers require a second coating, whether it be a primer surfacer or a primer sealer, to isolate them from the atmosphere. They're not a barrier coating, they're an etching treatment, so they'll treat the substrate, but they don't create a barrier coating like an epoxy would with a tight network formation. So they'd be permeable to atmosphere over time. Well, I can't think of anywhere you couldn't apply a self-etching primer. It's designed to treat steel, so anywhere you have steel, it's an appropriate coating. I would say that, however, on the inside of a rail or somewhere where you have confined spaces, you need to top coat that with a barrier coating, whether it be a primer surfacer or a primer sealer. So inside of a rail, I would say an epoxy primer would be preferred because it's a single process as opposed to a two application in a confined space. All coatings require a thoroughly clean substrate to create good bonding. Whether that's mechanically cleaned and then chemically cleaned, you need to have a defect-free substrate to get good bonding between any of the primer, whether it's an epoxy or an etch primer or a metal treatment. Cleanliness is what creates the bond.